And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Jay and Judith Rock as they talk about marriage, exclamation point. And welcome. We're glad to have you with us. We appreciate you being here for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Marriage, exclamation point.
She says she can't hear you.
Oh,
So you have to keep your volume up. And here's the mic.
okay. Can you hear me now, Dua? Okay. If you can't hear me, anybody, just wave your hand in the screen, and I'll remember.
Also, I was going to make an announcement that Judith has difficulty hearing, so we need to speak loudly so that she can hear us when we come to the discussion and question portion.
Okay, and I'm such a non-tech person. This is the second time I've ever done Zoom. So I'm not aware very much of my own voice, what I have to do. So just wave if you can't hear me. Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So Jay and I met arguing. It was during the 1968 Duke University vigil. It was a campus-wide, week-long protest to get the university to pay minimum wage to non-academic employees who at that time were all Black, all of them. So many students, most of the university came out. We sat down in the quad in straight rows and stayed there, sitting there, sleeping there for a week. And we won. It was very satisfying. So one night, Jay and I were assigned to put together the next day's protest newsletter for all those of us who were out there, things we needed to know. So there we were around midnight, glaring at each other on each side of the mimeograph machine, which tells you how long ago it was. And we were arguing passionately over the editing and the writing of this one-page flyer. We didn't know each other, but we knew good writing and good, clear English, and we cared passionately about it. Arguing tells us a lot about the other person's passions and commitments. I learned something about Jay. I didn't know him at all, but I thought, this is a person who cares about things I care about. And then we didn't see each other again until a few months later, at the end of that summer after graduation. We met again working for a local community organizing project. Jay had a girlfriend at that time. I was engaged to someone else. By April, we were engaged to each other, and in June, we got married. One might say we owed it all to good arguing. I think that good arguing can be a peculiar spiritual practice. Remember all those Old Testament prophets who are constantly arguing with God loudly, not very politely? But good arguing, which I think means arguing without the desire to hurt or discount or win at all costs, can open our partner's heart and mind to us and open us to our partner's heart and mind. Good arguing wants the other person to come closer into clear sight. It wants understanding and connection. Do you see what I mean? More than it wants agreement. After 55 years, we are still editing and arguing. arguing over each other's writing. We both write. We're still arguing over life and meaning and marriage. Of course, our arguing isn't always good. It's very hard not to want to win. But when we get it right, good arguing, which always includes that challenging thing, good listening, takes us deeper into knowing and loving each other.
Yes, and it's a very intimate kind of community. Marriage is a very intimate and intentional, maybe the smallest intimate intentional community. We live together day after day, and surprisingly to me, this dailiness turns out to be a great blessing, at least it has for us. We rub up against each other over and over again, like pebbles in a tumbler. I don't know whether you've ever seen the tumblers full of pebbles getting rubbed together, tossed together around the ground. Not always comfortable being a pebble in a tumbler. In fact, sometimes it's downright annoying. But when we allow it, the tumbling process polishes off the rough edges of our behavior. And it brings out facets of who we are that weren't visible before. In fact, beautiful parts of who we are that were formerly covered by our shells become visible through our tumbling around together. So at this point, talking about marriage and spirituality, I'm tempted to read the entire marriage service from the Book of Common Prayer, because it is a wonderful treatise on marriage as a spiritual practice in itself. But for my purposes, it's probably enough just to remind us that the service is about joining together. It's about blessing a union of partners and being present as God makes one out of two. So living out this knitting together day by day is the challenge and the joy of being married. And another part of it, along with the tumbler aspect, is being helpmates to each other. I have found this simple idea remarkably important to me, because I could not have gotten here where I am now without Judith's help. I don't know whether she'd say the same, but we are, in fact, what was in earlier times called helpmeets to one another. A very old form that comes from the King James Bible version of the 2nd chapter of Genesis. The Lord God said, "It is not good that a man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him," or appropriate or right for him. Each of us is the right, appropriate partner for the other. So we encourage one another, we comfort one another, we challenge one another, we argue, we share our lives together, we share the grocery shopping and all the nitty-gritty details. We mutually provide for one another. And this is really satisfying and also very revealing about who we are. I think I have found that through all the nitty-gritty stuff that this involves, we have together found our way slowly into a relationship of mutuality. Mutuality. We can actually serve one another now in a kind of intimate communion.
Yes. It seems relevant to me talking about spirituality and marriage to think about how we come, each of us, each of the partners in every kind of marriage, how we come to the recognition and need to think about spirituality and to act in ways that gets us there to the spirituality of marriage. Neither Jay nor I grew up in the church. My grandparents were the church-related people. They were Southern Mountain Methodists and Baptists and whoever the circuit rider was that month. But my parents left all that when they left the mountains. In high school, I joined a youth group at a Presbyterian church because I learned that they were going to Jamaica on a work project and I wanted to go. That was my motivation. I was part of the Presbyterian Student Center in college. And interestingly and oddly, thinking back through the lens of 55 years, our first date was, it was sort of our first date. Our first date was a Passover Seder in the communal house where I was living in Durham, North Carolina. Our second date, also somewhat oddly, was a sunrise Easter service, but it rained, so we went elsewhere. We were learning a lot about each other's religious quest or spirituality, though we would certainly not have used that language. When we decided to get married, it was clear that the standard wedding service was not going to work. So we wrote our service and our vows with the help of the University Presbyterian chaplain. Our wedding was out in the woods, appropriately. Jay and I and our best man and woman stood with our backs to the edge of a little bluff beside a stream. All during the ceremony, my mother whispered loudly, "Don't step back, don't step back." She meant don't fall in the water. But later, over the years, her words became a reminder that falling into the water, so to speak, is what a wedding is for. It's a launching into hopes and adventures and plans and dreams, and also into we don't know what, and maybe wouldn't choose. On our living room wall is an old manuscript, medieval manuscript drawing of Jonah falling headfirst off the boat into the water, where the whale is waiting. My mother was right to be anxious. Our whale was waiting to swallow us and spit us out, not whole, but more whole. And spit us out into adulthood, growing love for each other, and a new sense of God, somehow waiting, pressing, knowing more than we knew.
One of my spiritual mentors has been Wendell Berry, the Kentucky writer and poet and farmer. One of his characters, Hannah Coulter, in a novel of that same name, has this to say about marriage and love. He says, "Love in this world doesn't come out of thin air. Like ourselves, it grows out of the ground. It has a body and a place." Love, for me, only has become real as it has become embodied, as it's been incarnate. And perhaps the most important thing I've learned about about this business of being married is the importance of and the joy of making my love for Judith real. So, and that leads me on to say that the heart of this business of making love real for me, of the honoring and cherishing that the service again talks about, is to be faithful, faithfulness, fidelity. This is probably the most important spiritual work of marriage. In practice, to live in fidelity with each other means to be there for each other no matter what. It's about perseverance. It's about staying with each other, whatever comes. It's about solidarity. It's not easy. It's messy, full of tension, but it's also very makes one joyful. One of the things that it means is to keep boundaries, including sexual boundaries. And I mention that because we don't hear much about that these days. But it's been I think it's very important in marriage for boundaries to be created so that together we have a safe and a private place to be together. Our sharing with one another is not to be shared with others. It's for us alone. In a way, you could say we make and keep a room of love just for one another. That's where we can be and share deeply. Another part of fidelity is to learn to have faith in one another, to trust one another. This has included for me learning to bring into our circle of relationship everything, so that there are no secrets. I've learned that our reality, our joint reality, as messy as it may be, is much better and much more lovable than any altered, illusory, made up version of things. Only what is real can lead on to what is glorious. Of course, fidelity also requires learning humility, to let go of control and to put yourself in your partner's care, to deal with failures and hurts and fears in the open with one another, to cooperate with one another in knitting together the knitting together that God is doing with us. I think of marriage, I guess, as a kind of calling, all by itself, calling in itself. It's a way of faithfulness in which we slowly and haltingly become able to be true to God's calling of us, of each of us, and of us as a couple. At our best, and I mean, not always the case, at our best, we nurture each other and we nurture for each other a kind of opening to what God is inviting us to do. We nurture a commitment that includes openness to the movement of the Spirit in our lives. It includes openness to move into a life that's larger than what we now know. A life that's new, a life that certainly is going to be, can be more loving than what we now have.
Sometimes during our first year of marriage in our student apartment in Berkeley, I would go into the bathroom and shut the door and sit down on the edge of the tub thinking, now what do I do? Trying to figure out being married. Neither Jane or I have siblings. We had friends, but we had never lived with another person more or less our own age. We had never lived without at least a bedroom as a completely private space. But now we had landed on planet marriage. Sometimes it was the most wonderful place in the universe. Sometimes we wondered where to get a ticket home. During those first years, we were part of the prayer group, taught and led by Flora Worley, a Christian prayer and spirituality leader at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Jay loved this group and still uses practices from it. I didn't love it and was bored. Over the years, we've looked for shared spirituality practices that work for both of us. We've done versions of the Ignatian Examen, that shared evening look at the past day, what happened, what was disappointing, what was wonderful, what was in between. Now, at each evening at dinner, before we sit down to eat, we light a candle on the table, and that candle stays lit all evening until bedtime. And then we go and stand in front of the candle, holding hands, and we say 2 short prayers from the prayer book, and also take time for our own individual out loud prayers. It's a short, easy practice which brings us closer together, no matter what's happened to us or between us that day. Our spiritual practices also include going to the Thursday Eucharist at St. Boniface, grace before meals, lots of discussion of theological and biblical questions and ideas. All of those are little things. None of them are earth-shaking. But all those little things, for me, matter. They're little bricks in the wall. They're little threads in that union God is weaving. But what do we do? What do any of us do when something deeply hurts and threatens a marriage? Whatever spiritual practices we've built and learned together are part of what we have to help us when bad things happen. When something has been done that wounds or tears apart trust or violates deeply held principles, the thing that heals the hurt is the renewal of trust. In my experience, secrets can be like miserable animals kept in the dark. They will eventually turn and bite hard. Simple. The animals have to be found and cared for. Forgiveness has to somehow be offered and accepted. But the path to that forgiveness is not easy or short. Some friends wrote a book called Don't Forgive Too Soon, which we sometimes do just to get something hard and unhappy finished, in quotes. Instead of that, our commitment to the practice of spirituality in our marriage can give us the ground for laying out carefully and in strong light all the truth of whatever the situation is. It gives us the opportunity to look together at whatever hard, frightening truth confronts us. It gives us the chance to rebuild trust. That new trust is the wellspring of forgiveness. No trust, no forgiveness that matters. And the forgiveness we can eventually come to opens the door for joy and love to come in again and anew. Amen.
Well, Judith and Jay, thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate that. And now is an opportunity for people to ask questions or bring up points for discussion. And I ask you to use the Zoom feature for raising your hand, but we have a very small group today, so I'll be able to view and see anyone who raises their hand physically as well. And with that, any thoughts that your questions you want to ask?
Solved everything.
Or scared everybody.
Yeah, Michael and Rita?
Actually, Judith, I loved your whole sense of arguing as a benefit. I think in all relationships, but especially in marriage, you grow up with the idea that you should not be arguing, that it leads you down a rabbit hole that is only filled with hurt and anger and everything else. But you reframed it in such an intimate way. It was a beautiful benefit, and I thank you for that. It was a good way to reframe it.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, I think
You speak a little louder, Michael?
yes, I think sometimes we come from different family systems, and we need to address that to be able to argue honestly. And I think you addressed that several times in your sharing of honesty and humility in your relationship, that to get to that intimacy of honesty, you need to be able to share on that level of honesty what the backgrounds are, to be able to honestly address where we're coming from, to be able to say, okay, I'm used to arguing. Like in my family, my mother and I had such a great rapport of arguing. It was just natural. You know, I could run out of the house to avoid her, you know, really giving me a good lecture, and come back and we'd go at it, and then I take my punishment, but we did it openly. Like one time I cursed, she got the soap out, washed my mouth out, and then 10 years later we were discussing that, and she said to me at the time, when she did wash my mouth out, you know, where did you learn that word? And, you know, with all the gusto I could find, I said, from you, you know. And with that, she grabbed my neck and, you know, said, to your room. So I went up to my room, but 10 years later, we were talking. She said, you know, I should have said, I'm sorry. Yes, you learned it from me.
Yeah.
But we learned to be open with one another. But it took time, as you know, indicated. And I think in all relationships, we need to be able to find those avenues where we can be honest enough and trust one another to say that and to develop that. So thank you for that wonderful, ability to work at it, not just to, walk away from it, as happens a lot of times.
I think that's really so important. I wasn't going to say this, but on the sort of dark side of what you're saying, my parents did not have a rapport, and they argued constantly, frighteningly and loudly and angrily, not at all well. And so I think that actually might be the root of my own deep concern for good argument, because that's the atmosphere. Bad arguing is what I grew up in.
Mhm.
I'm good at arguing. I'm very good at it. I was on the debate team actually in high school, and I almost always won. For me, the huge temptation is to win. I'd
Yeah.
love to win. And still, when Jay and I are working at good argument, I have to struggle often with telling my desire to win to just shut up and sit there.
Mm.
So I have a real groove in that bad, unhappy arguing situation, and to try to take that groove and train it into something else, some other kind of plan, has been really important, wonderful, healing. But it's still sometimes struggles.
Well, just to confirm you're not alone, um, I have to say often to Rita, well, I have to actually say it to myself first and then share it with Rita. Do I want to be right or kind
Right.
when we argue? Because I like being right. And a lot of times it's better to be kind than to be right.
And sometimes I come from a very different culture, as you said, Michael. But in my family, no, you didn't talk about the things that were important.
Ooh, yeah.
It was just kept your mouth shut. And my father was right,
Period.
period.
Mm.
And sometimes I find that when we get in arguments, I find myself adopting that position. Just thinking that I don't have to even say anything because I'm obviously right. So learning how to do this, talking with one another, arguing with one another, being kind, and listening. It's
And
been
responding.
responding, not just sitting there like like the privileged lump of rightness.
Or a right father.
Yeah, it's been a lot of learning.
Planet marriage is not always an easy planet to live on.
Yeah. I love the image of the tumbling process. Because that's so true. And you're giving great examples right now, too. And you gave it during your talk. But what's being shared now, between everything that's being shared, it is that tumbling effect. You're rubbing against one another, and those stones clanging just don't clang, I mean, they hurt as they're bumping up against one another. Um, and it's being able to absorb that hurt, without wanting to hurt the other in return,
Right.
you know.
Jay and Judith, could you share a little bit about how the two of you wound up in ministry? Because you're both ordained.
How we wound up in ministry.
Well, for me, Rita, I wound up in ministry, but only briefly. My interest, I majored in religion and then I went to seminary, but my interest was actually never ministry, and it took me a while to figure that out. My interest was in theology, but I was ordained in the Presbyterian church, and I was for a few years functionally a Presbyterian minister, and then I kept the ordination for a while. In the Presbyterian church, ordination goes with function, and it's not forever. It's, the function stops. You don't want to do it anymore. You give up your ordination. So that's what I did. I experienced an overwhelming, intense, what I can only call to dance, to be a performing artist, to be an artist about the collision, the meeting of art forms and theology. And that's what I've done with my life in dance, choreography, theater, playwright, novelist. That's the center of what I do now. In parish ministry there was no room. My experience was there was no room in the church I was in, the Presbyterian church, for that vision. So I demitted, we call it, demitted ministry, and took the ministry I had been actually called to. If that makes sense.
When I was first a minister applying for jobs right out of seminary, I was in the Central Valley of California, and church groups, the search committee groups would ask me to come, and we'd sit down, we'd have dinner, and they'd talk and all that. And there was always at least one or two people who would say, well, when did you first meet Jesus? And I always had to say, I've never met Jesus. I've never, except through the gospel. And the only way that I've had a personal encounter with Jesus is through the body of Christ. Now, for a lot of Presbyterians, this is a hard concept. This is, it's much easier to think of having a personal relationship with Jesus, your Lord and Savior. Well, I've never had a personal I've had a personal relationship with the body of Christ, which is the saving vessel that I chose to ride on my life. And so that gives you some idea of why I didn't stay in the ministry for very long, but went into teaching because it was more my calling anyway. And say the context for the teaching. Well, I don't know exactly what you mean. I was, no, I wasn't a professor. I got involved in the ecumenical, the church, the kind of church that I was part of was the ecumenical church, which means that we worked, Judith and I both worked for Church World Service,
That was our day
which-
job.
which was our, when we were going back to graduate school some more.
And I was dancing. He was in graduate school.
Right, so Church World Service is an ecumenical refugee resettlement aid organization. And it's still around, it's connected to the National Council of Churches. And so I got involved in ecumenical life. And then they asked me to, with my degree in religions, they asked me to come and be the staff person to build relationships between the churches and people of other religions, and to do teaching about what that was all about and what religion is all about, and why Christians don't have to be afraid of people of other religions and topics like that. So Judith supported me through all that.
Not financially.
Not financially, no, but I mean, in terms of our marriage was able to, we were able to support each other in answering our respective calls.
And Jay supported me greatly, partly financially. We were both putting the peanut butter on the table. He supported me enormously in my dance and art calling, which developed into a major thing, lots of touring, lots of traveling, all the intense schedule of professional dancer. Not convenient for him very often. But we tried to give each other what each other needed, even when it was annoying and expensive sometimes.
Thank you. Mike, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, thank you. But I think that a good trait to have is the perceiving subtle expressions and mood. And I don't always have that. I don't know when I'm starting to annoy my wife, for example. Do you think that can be developed? That trait can be developed?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the trait.
Oh, perceiving subtle expressions and mood in the partner.
Oh. Perceiving subtle expressions of mood. One another.
Oh, yes, that's really important.
You think it can be developed?
I do. I think it's really hard, and the more annoyed I am about something, the harder it is. But if I can mostly just look, I usually feel it first in my body, being that sort of person. But if Jay is depressed or upset or angry, I start reacting physically, and that's how I know I feel. The more I can get my own sometimes uneasiness or irritation or impatience out of the way, and I find that hard, if I can just be attentive to him, the more I see. But I have to get myself out of the way first. And I've learned to know the changes in his body, if he's anxious or angry or upset. Because, people, the way they sit, the way they stand, the way they move, I think that tells us a lot. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes.
And that, I can't stress enough for me that what Judith was saying about getting myself out of the way, because I can come up with an interpretation of what's going on inside her very easily. and it's not always correct. In fact, there's often pieces of it that are not correct. So I have to continually practice that and work at that. Because I tend to project things onto her that aren't there.
And I do that too. So
We all do that with one another, but yeah, so that takes a lot of practice.
And patience and starting over. I'm moved to ask. You all know the old Myers-Briggs system and test. The what are you sort of. Whether people know that, familiar with that?
Yeah.
I see some heads nodding. We encountered this, in seminary all those decades ago. And we still use it some. Sometimes when I'm half annoyed and half amused or something, I'll say to Jay, "Oh, you're just an F." And he'll say to me, "Oh, you T's are so annoying," because we're very different.
Feeling types and thinking.
Feeling types and thinking types, they can really. But what really helps us is we're both introverts and we're both what Myers-Briggs calls intuitives, as opposed to extroverts and people who are interested in what's just visibly there. Sense perception. So this has been, I know it's not useful for everyone, but this has been useful for us as a kind of shorthand and reminder that some of our differences are just innate. I am never going to be a feeling type. He is never going to be a thinking type. And that helps us.
I want to add something before we move to whoever's next. And that is that you can hear us talking a lot about psychology here. And I have, and I think Judith would agree, I don't know, we'll find out. I think we have put a huge amount of work into our marriage, and that work has in no small measure been about figuring out who we are as individuals and figuring out how we can go about living in the world in ways that are loving and kind and true to ourselves. So that's why I like to say that I think marriage is really a spiritual process. It's in itself a spirituality. And I don't think you need to talk about marriage and spirituality, because I think marriage is a form of spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like joining an order. There's a sense of cloister to it. There's a sense of obedience, and I'm not talking about the old, the woman person and the man person, but a sense of obedience of persons
To one
another and the situation. So it just gets more and more complicated, I'm sure.
All right, thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, if not, Judith and Jay, thank you so much for sharing with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Good to see all of you.
Oh, thank you.
Blessings, everyone.
Excellent.